James Lee, a blind man, sits playing the guitar on the sidewalk, where the gazes of society are constantly judgmental and alienated. Every day, he sat there regularly, his trembling hands gliding over the strings, creating sad melodies, full of ups and downs like his own life. An old guitar that is no longer capable of producing the same great sounds as before, but for him, it is the only tool to free the soul from deep wounds. In the past, he was a famous painter, a talent recognized by the whole world. But a tragic accident when he saved a person from a fire changed everything. His eyes were gone, and with it, he lost not only the ability to see the world around him but also his family. Michael Lee, his only son, ran away from home, judging his father as an incompetent man who only knew how to plunge into distant dreams without taking care of his family. To Michael, his father was a useless man, a dreamer who had nothing worth after the accident, and the fact that he had to raise his family was an unbearable burden. But when James Lee sat on the sidewalk, playing immense music, he didn't think about pleasing anyone. He simply found serenity in his soul, despite the alienated gazes and ridicule from all around. He had nothing left but old memories and heartbeats, nothing to lose. Michael has become a stranger in his own family. The relationship between father and son had long been fractured, and when he received the news that his father continued to play the piano on the sidewalk, anger and shame rose in his heart again. For Michael, it was not the act of a respectable father but the humiliation, the suppression of his own pain. He wondered why his father couldn't stop, couldn't give up his dreams and live a more realistic life. That day, when Michael's luxury car stopped in front of the cafe where James was sitting, his mind was still filled with feelings of anger and frustration. He got out of the car, his hands in his pants pockets. His eyes were cold as if he didn't want to see the man anymore. The unending feeling of shame made him look at his father like a strange object. He approached and said coldly, "What are you doing here? Don't embarrass me anymore." James heard his son call, but he wasn't surprised. Michael's judgment was no longer as painful as it used to be. However, looking at his son standing in front of him, James could not hide the sadness in his eyes. He understood that the father-son relationship was now too far away. He smiled in silence, but it was full of pain, an acceptance of the fact that his son had completely left him. At this time, an unexpected event occurred. One person in the crowd recognized James Lee and shouted, "This is the famous painter, James Lee, who glorified art, who is known to the whole world." The words sounded like a slap in the face to Michael. He looked around, suddenly realized the respect that everyone had for his father, and at that moment, his psychology was completely reversed. A feeling of guilt, shame, and confusion rose in his heart. He was surprised to realize that the father he had despised for so long turned out to be a man of greater value than he had ever thought. The murmur spread quickly, and the eyes began to change. Passers-by, who had once passed him without looking back, now stopped and looked up with respect. They realized that they were standing in front of a legend, an artist whose name was once everywhere, but now abandoned on this street corner. Eyes of admiration began to turn to James, and a few people even approached to take pictures with him, expressing their admiration. Michael stood silent for a moment, unable to believe what had just happened. He was so used to banishing his father's presence, so used to seeing him as a worthless person. But now, when he saw the respect that others had for him, his judgments suddenly became meaningless. Feelings of regret and shame surged in his heart, suffocating him. He looked around, realizing that the people who had just looked at his father with disdainful eyes were now bowing their heads respectfully. Guilt filled his heart, making him unbearable. Michael walked closer to James, his hands clenched, his face covered in sweat and tension. He opened his mouth, but he couldn't speak. The words, "sorry," choked in his throat, unable to escape. Suddenly, a person in the crowd, seeing Michael's strange silence, suddenly spoke up. "Is he your son? And yet, in the past, we even despised this man." The sentence sounded like a wake-up call. All eyes turned to Michael, and he felt the embarrassment rise by the minute. People began to criticize his heartlessness, who looked at the old man without knowing that it was the one who created priceless works of art, who once made the world admire. Michael didn't know what to do. He just stood there, embarrassed and regretful. He looked at James. In his father's eyes, there was grief but also resilience. At that moment, all of Michael's thoughts shattered. He no longer sees his father as a useless person, no longer despises him for his past mistakes and failures. Finally, he lowered his head. His eyes filled with tears, and said softly, "Father, I'm sorry." His voice choked up, unable to utter any more words. James looked up, didn't say anything, just smiled slightly. That smile is not forgiveness, but acceptance. He didn't need belated apologies. He was too used to being hurt. But in this moment, Michael realized that respect can't wait until people stumble, and that contempt will only cause him to face regret. The crowd began to fall silent, and no one dared to look down at James anymore. And Michael, who had once considered himself right, now stood in the middle of a sea of silent people, feeling his loneliness, as if he had lost a part of his life. Michael stood silently, his heart rising with a sense of shame and self-reproach. He could not believe that he had ever despised his respected father, who had quietly devoted his life without demanding recognition. After witnessing James's brave and decisive actions, he realized that he was wrong, not only with his father but also with himself. His view was different now. He felt a sense of silence, as everything around him suddenly became vague and small. The whole crowd around them seemed to be absorbing a painful lesson that they had never thought of. They had so easily judged people by their appearances, by their hearsay, and had forgotten that a person's true value is not in what we see in the moment, but in what they have experienced and dedicated throughout their lives. Michael looked at the shadow of his father's back, who still walked tenaciously with broad shoulders, without a word. He understood that it was not James who needed recognition from anyone, but that he was the one who lacked the necessary respect for the person who had given birth and raised him. The truth is, it was he who missed the precious opportunity to understand and love his father while he could. The lesson Michael realized was a lesson of patience, of humility, and of respect. He understands that sometimes people are too easy to judge and despise the people around them, just because they don't have anything outstanding or great success. But the truth is, there are people who have lived a life full of sacrifice, but have never demanded recognition from anyone. They are the ones who have left a deep mark on their lives, even in small, silent actions. Michael now knows that pride only blinds people, and respect is not something that must be given to someone only when they have succeeded, but something that must be given in every moment. If we don't know how to respect others when they have not achieved success, we will miss the opportunity to learn, to see their true value. When everyone around us has gradually dispersed, the atmosphere still leaves a poignant lesson about properly recognizing and appreciating what is really important. Michael is no longer the arrogant person he used to be. He realized that, if he didn't know how to appreciate the people around him, and didn't know how to learn from experienced people, he would forever miss out on the opportunity to develop himself. From now on, Michael will never judge people by what they see. He will learn to see deep values, learn to respect and love those who have been by his side, not because of what they have, but because they themselves are human beings. He understood that life cannot be measured by material success or fame, but by the way we love and respect the people around us. And when Michael turned away, he knew that he could change, that he could start over, starting with respecting his father and those around him. It would be the first step in a new journey, one that he would live with humility and respect, and find the true value of life.